July 1952. All Hallows College, Dublin, Ireland. A letter sits in an archive. Handwritten. Backslanting cursive, neat and controlled. Personal stationery. The author is 23 years old. Her name, at the time of writing, is still Jacqueline Bouvier. She is writing to Father Joseph Leonard, a Vincentian priest she met only once, 2 years earlier, on a trip to Ireland. She will meet him in person exactly one more time in her life. But for the next 14 years, she will write to him the things she cannot tell anyone else. She describes a man she has been seeing, a congressman from Massachusetts named John Kennedy. She writes, as later reported by the Irish Times from the documents themselves, "He hurt me terribly when he was campaigning and never called up for weeks." She continues, calm, analytical, not a woman in the fog of first love, but one who sees exactly what she is looking at. I think he was as much in love with me as he could be with anyone, and now maybe he will want to get married because a senator needs a wife. But if he ever does ask me to marry him, it will be for rather practical reasons, because his career is this driving thing with him. This letter was written 14 months before their engagement. Jackie Kennedy knew exactly who John Kennedy was before she married him. She married him anyway. That decision, made with open eyes in ink on a page that survived her by decades, is where this story begins. The wedding was September 12, 1953, Newport, Rhode Island, St. Mary's Church. 800 guests inside, several thousand more standing in the street to watch them arrive. Motorcycle escorts. Photographers stacked 6 rows deep behind the barricades. Life magazine ran the photographs across a full spread. The press called it the social event of the season. She wore a silk taffeta gown designed by Anne Lowe, a black American couturier whose name appeared in almost none of the coverage. The New York Times described the ceremony as brilliant. The Associated Press ran the wire image of him lifting her veil. The family's public statement positioned the match as mutual, romantic, inevitable. His brother Ted Kennedy would later tell a biographer that Jack was smitten with her right from the very beginning. The image of the first meeting, dinner party, witty repartee, immediate chemistry, was repeated in every profile, every retrospective, every book. The public story, love match. Political dynasty. American royalty. The family story, a devoted couple navigating the pressures of political life together. The story told at every memorial, every anniversary, every library dedication from 1963 onward, the most celebrated partnership in modern American history. That is what the public record says. The letter she wrote to Father Joseph Leonard in July 1952 says something different. The gap between those two documents is what this script is about. Return to that 1952 letter. She did not only predict that John Kennedy would propose for rather practical reasons. She compared him to Macbeth. By name. The word ambition. Shakespeare's most ruthless tragic figure. A man who wants the crown so badly he is willing to destroy everything in reach to get it. That was the comparison she reached for. Not Romeo. Not any romantic archetype. Macbeth. And then she went further. She described her fear that Kennedy was like her own father, John Jack Bouvier, a Wall Street broker, a handsome man, and a serial philanderer whose infidelity had destroyed her parents' marriage. She wrote that her father loves the chase and is bored with the conquest, and once married needs proof he's still attractive, so flirts with other women and resents you. She was 23 years old. She wrote this as a psychological portrait, clean, clinical, self-aware. She had watched this exact pattern play out inside her own family. She had named it, mapped it, put it on paper in her neat back-slanting hand and sent it to a priest in Dublin. And then 14 months later, she put on the silk taffeta gown and walked down the aisle at St. Mary's. The public assumed love was carrying her forward. Sentiment. The hope that she was wrong about him. The letter proves she was not operating from hope. She was operating from calculation, clear-eyed, documented calculation made in full view of the consequences she had already named. She went in knowing. The question the documents raise is not why she went in. It's what it cost her to stay. 1954. The marriage is 1 year old. Kennedy undergoes spinal surgery in October, the second of 2 such operations, and one that will leave him so close to death he receives last rites. He convalesces for months in Palm Beach. The recovery is long, uncomfortable, and precarious. During that time, Jackie manages the household, handles correspondence, and helps coordinate what will eventually become a book called Profiles in Courage. Published January 1, 1956. Credited to Senator John F. Kennedy. Awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Biography in 1957. What the public record said, a senator, bedridden and in pain, rose to produce a literary work of moral courage. A Pulitzer Prize winner. What the documented record eventually revealed. In his 2008 memoir, Kennedy's longtime aide and speechwriter Ted Sorensen acknowledged he did a first draft of most chapters and helped choose the words of many of its sentences. In 1957, journalist Drew Pearson said on a nationally broadcast Mike Wallace interview that Kennedy was the only man in history that I know who won a Pulitzer Prize for a book that was ghostwritten for him. Sorensen at the time signed an affidavit denying it. He corrected the record 50 years later. Jackie's contribution during the months of Kennedy's convalescence, running the household, maintaining his correspondence, supporting the project whose primary drafting was done by someone else, was never credited, mentioned, or acknowledged. Not in the book. Not in the Pulitzer acceptance. Not in the family's official account. Meanwhile, she wrote to Father Leonard. According to journalists who examined the correspondence before its 2014 auction, she wrote in this period that she loved being married much more than I did even in the beginning. That is what she put on paper for the priest in Dublin. Warmth. Contentment. A woman settling into her life. The public letter. The private one. The gap between them had already opened and it was already wide. One newspaper report. Dateline, August 24, 1956. One paragraph. Clinical. Brief, Aug. 23, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, wife of Senator John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts, who was expecting her first child in October, lost the baby this evening in an emergency operation at Newport Hospital. She has been staying here with her stepfather and mother, Mr. and Mrs. Hugh D. Ottingcloss. At the hospital, her condition was reported as good. That is the public record of the day. It does not say where the senator was. He was cruising the Mediterranean aboard a yacht, traveling with Senator George Smathers of Florida and other companions. Jackie had awakened on the morning of August 23 to heavy bleeding. She went alone, with her mother and stepfather, to Newport Hospital. The delivery was by emergency cesarean section. The baby was stillborn. The baby was later given the name Arabella. Jackie's sister Lee Radziwill flew in immediately. The senator did not return immediately. According to Senator Smathers, as reported in multiple biographies, he urged Kennedy to come home. The argument that reached Kennedy, in Smathers's reported telling, that not returning would damage his future presidential campaign. That was the argument that worked. Political calculation, not the death of a child. Not a wife alone in a recovery ward. A calculation about what the absence would cost him in 1960. He came home days after the stillbirth. The New York Times had noted his wife's condition was reported as good. No reporter asked where he had been. No reporter asked why he had not come home. The question was not asked publicly for years. What happened in the weeks after Arabella has only been documented recently, and even now, incompletely. Jackie Kennedy consulted a divorce attorney. This is reported by biographer J. Randy Taraborelli in his 2024 book JFK, Public, Private, Secret, drawn from decades of interviews with Kennedy family associates, close friends, and, critically, Jack Warnick, a longtime friend of Jackie's who told Terbrelli direct details of the marriage's private structure. The claim is also supported in Maureen Callahan's 2024 book Ask Not: The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed, which draws on separate reporting. 2 independent biographers. Separate sources. The same general shape of events. When Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., the family patriarch, the man who had spent decades engineering his family's ascent, learned that his daughter-in-law was planning to leave, he intervened directly. The terms Terbrelli reports, $100,000 upon the birth of Jackie's first living child. Financial freedom. The promise of more. There is a legal dimension here that neither biographer fully documents, because the private family documents have not been released. What has been released is this: Jackie remained. Caroline Bouvier Kennedy was born on November 27, 1957. That is fact. That is on the public record. What preceded it, the attorney, the patriarch, the financial architecture of a marriage held together by an agreement rather than by choice, is presented here as reported, clearly attributed, not confirmed. But note this: the woman who wrote in 1952 that she expected to be married for rather practical reasons was now, it seems, being paid to stay in the marriage for practical reasons. The letter she sent, the agreement she was offered, the symmetry is not coincidence. It is the gap made visible. In the same years, the middle years of the marriage, the years that should have been settling into routine, she returned to the letters. One passage, reported by Shepherd's Auction House and later covered by the Irish Times before the 2014 sale, records her writing this to Father Leonard: "Maybe I'm just dazzled and picture myself in a glittering world of crowned heads and men of destiny, and not just a sad little housewife that can be very glamorous from the outside, but if you're in it, and you're lonely, it could be a hell." She was writing on the stationery of a United States senator. A man on a trajectory toward the White House. A man whose every public appearance she appeared beside, whose image she helped craft, whose political rise she supported with a full investment of her intelligence and her social capital. She wrote the word hell. Not difficult. Not lonely at times. Not the careful, managed language of a woman who knows her correspondence might be read. She wrote hell to a priest she had met twice, in a country she barely knew, because he was the only person she had found who would hold the truth without wanting anything from it. And she told him something else that deserves to sit with you. It's so good in a way to write all this down and get it off your chest, because I never do really talk about it with anyone. Not with her mother. Not with her sister Lee. Not with friends. Not with the family she had married into. No one. She had no one to tell the truth to except the archive in Dublin. Here, the researcher speaks directly. I want to stop for a moment and say something that is not in any of these documents. The thing that keeps stopping me in this research is not the affairs. Not the stillbirth. Not even the financial agreement, as cold as that is. It's this: she told one person, for 14 years. A man she met twice. In another country, who kept her letters in a college archive until they were both dead. Every woman watching this has had a version of this. The thing you only said once, to one person, in the one context where it felt safe. The place you kept the true version of yourself because the other versions were what people needed from you. That's not ancient history. That is the condition she was describing from inside the White House. Back to the evidence. January 20, 1961. Inauguration Day. Jackie Kennedy stands beside the president in a pale beige wool coat and a matching pillbox hat. The image travels around the world. The photographic archive of the Kennedy White House is enormous. Jackie with the children on the lawn. Jackie in a ball gown at a state dinner. Jackie presiding over a concert by Pablo Casals in the East Room. Jackie leading a television tour of the restored White House, watched by 80 million Americans. Jackie on horseback in Virginia, in a swimsuit at Hyannisport, in her husband's arms at Palm Beach. The images tell a specific story, a couple, engaged, present, together. The floor plan of the White House second floor shows that the President and the First Lady had separate bedroom suites, the President's bedroom to one side of the hall, the First Lady's bedroom and dressing room to the other. A connecting passage between them, not a shared room. This was not unusual for the era or the building. Eisenhower and Mamie had the same arrangement. It is mentioned not as evidence of estrangement, but as architecture. It is what exists. What the record also shows, Jackie was absent from Washington for significant stretches. The press documented these absences, Newport, Virginia, Cape Cod, Europe, and explained them as evidence of her love of culture, her independent spirit, her need for space after the social demands of the White House. None of the coverage asked whether the absences reflected something else. She was photographed constantly. She appeared beside him constantly. She gave the public exactly what the public wanted to see. What she wrote to Father Leonard from inside those same years, if you're in it, and you're lonely, it could be a hell, did not make it into any photograph. March through June, 1964, 4 months after Dallas. Jackie Kennedy sat for a formal oral history, 7 recorded conversations with Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., the historian and Kennedy family ally who had served in the White House. The sessions were held at her home in Washington. They run 8.5 hours. She speaks with what witnesses described as total composure. Dry-eyed. Precise. She sealed the recordings herself. Her instruction not to be released until 50 years after her death. That would have been 2044. Her daughter Caroline released them early, September 2011, to mark the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's presidency. They were published as Jacqueline Kennedy, Historic Conversations on Life with John F. Kennedy. In those recordings, she described her marriage as a rather terribly Victorian or Asiatic relationship and said she derived all her opinions from her husband. Caroline Kennedy told ABC's Good Morning America that when her own daughters listened to that passage, they were, her word, horrified. Not at the marriage, at the description, at the image of this clearly formidable woman presenting her own intelligence as simply absorbed into her husband's. Now hold that against the private archive. The Schlesinger tapes, a rather terribly Victorian or Asiatic relationship. A wife who deferred. The Leonard letters, the same woman describing ambition, calculation, loneliness, and a hell she could only name to one person in the world. Both are her voice. Both documents are real. Both survive. She was performing different selves for different archives, and she knew it, and she chose which archive would be sealed and which would be forgotten in Dublin. The Schlesinger tapes she controlled. She sealed them with explicit instructions. She understood they would eventually be opened. The Leonard letters she had forgotten about, or thought were safe, or simply could not reach at the end. That is the most important thing the two archives tell us. Read against each other. She was careful, meticulous, managing the record her whole life. And the truest thing that survived her survived by accident. If this work matters to you, if you believe the private record deserves the same attention as the public one, subscribe. It takes 1 second. It keeps this going. Back to the evidence. There is no photograph from August 23, 1956. No senator in a hospital corridor. No image of him at a bedside. No waiting room. No arrival at Newport. Nothing that documents his presence at Newport Hospital on the day his daughter was stillborn, or in the days immediately following, because he was not there. What exists in the photographic archive from that period? Images from the Mediterranean. A senator, tanned and relaxed, photographed abroad on a yacht traveling with Senator George Smathers and companions. The dates overlap with Arabella's birth. That is not allegation. That is chronology. The New York Times ran one paragraph. Reported her condition as good. Did not note where the senator was. Did not ask. No reporter followed up. No editorial asked the obvious question, where was he? For decades, the dominant image of the Kennedy marriage was photographic, thousands of frames documenting proximity, togetherness, the visual evidence of a devoted partnership. The public built its entire understanding of what they were to each other from pictures. The beach at Hyannisport. The Oval Office doorway. Autumn leaves in Newport. He lifting her veil at the altar. The photograph is the evidence the public trusts most, because it seems like something that cannot lie. But a photograph only shows what was present when the shutter closed. It cannot show what was absent. It cannot show a hospital corridor in Newport with one fewer person in it than there should have been. It cannot show a cesarean delivery room or a recovery ward or a woman being told in the silence afterward that what she had been carrying was gone. The photographic archive of the Kennedy marriage is one of the most extensive in American history. The most revealing document from the summer of 1956 is the one that does not exist. Jackie learned the name of at least one of Kennedy's concurrent relationships not from him, but from his own sister. Patricia Kennedy Lawford told her. The woman's name was Joan Lundberg, 23 years old, a flight attendant and cocktail waitress based in California. Kennedy had first encountered her in August 1956, in the same month Arabella was born. They met again in September. Lundberg kept a memoir, unpublished. After her death, her family shared the pages with biographer J. Randy Taraborelli, who published the account in JFK, Public, Private, Secret in 2024. According to what Lundberg wrote, Kennedy described his marriage during one of their conversations as fine. Not great, but okay. He said it had been, in his own characterization, an arranged marriage. He used those words. About his own marriage. To a woman he was seeing while his wife was recovering from a stillbirth in a Newport hospital. When Jackie found out, she confronted him directly. The question she reportedly opened with, as Taraborelli reconstructs it from Lundberg's memoir pages and subsequent interviews, was, whose trailer park Joan? She had gotten there faster than he expected. The public record of this period, a rising senator and his elegant wife, navigating the demands of political life. The private record, a wife who had lost a child alone, been informed of what her husband was doing and with whom, confronted him directly, consulted a divorce attorney, and been offered a financial arrangement to remain, all within the span of a few months. These two realities existed simultaneously. The photographs from 1956 and 1957 show them together at public events, at dinners, at campaign appearances. Smiling, poised. The letters she wrote to Father Leonard were written in the same period. She had gotten there faster than he expected. She almost always had. The letter from 1952 proves that. She had named the pattern before the marriage began. She was simply living through what she had already predicted, one document at a time. 33 letters. 130-plus pages. Written between 1950 and 1964. On personal stationery. On the letterhead of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. On White House stationery. The auction house Shepherd's Irish Auction House sold them in Durrow, County Leys, Ireland, on June 10, 2014. They had been hidden in the archive at All Hallows College, Dublin, after Father Leonard's death. Discovered quietly. Held there untouched. Their expected sale price, up to $1.6 million. Shepherds described the collection as the unpublished autobiography of Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. That phrase is precise and it matters. Jackie Kennedy published no memoir. She gave very few extended interviews. She controlled what entered the public record about her inner life with extraordinary discipline, spending decades managing the archive of herself that history would receive. She sealed the Schlesinger oral history until 2044, then let Caroline move that date. She burned what she could reach. And yet, the autobiography existed. 33 letters. written to a man she met twice, in Dublin, who kept them in a college archive and told no one. She wrote to him because, as she told him, "It's so good in a way to write all this down and get it off your chest, because I never do really talk about it with anyone." She had no one else. Not her mother, Janet Auchincloss, a woman who reportedly urged her to accept the marriage and its terms. Not her sister Lee, who had her own complications inside the Kennedy orbit. Not the friends photographed beside her at state dinners and on beaches. No one. The truest record of her interior life was kept in a country she visited twice, by a man who was already dead when the world finally read what she had told him. Early 1964. A few months after November 22nd, Jackie wrote to Father Leonard again. About God. The Irish Times published the excerpt before the 2014 auction. The Associated Press confirmed it. The auction house attributed it directly to the manuscript. God will have some explaining to do to me if I ever see him. And then, in the same letter, I have to think there is a God, or I have no hope of finding Jack again. Those two sentences. Read them side by side. Rage and desperate need written on the same page. Not the composed widow of the public photographs, the woman in the black veil who walked behind the casket with a posture that the whole world called grace. Something rower than that. Something with teeth. The letter was written on White House stationery, the stationery of a building she had already left, carrying the letterhead of a life that had ended on a street in Dallas. And in the same period, she was sitting for the Schlesinger recordings across town, speaking for 8.5 hours. Composure, calm voice, total recall. On the Schlesinger tapes, controlled, strategic, choosing her words for posterity. To Father Leonard, on White House stationery, God will have some explaining to do. 2 documents. Same weeks, same woman. The gap between them is as wide as anything in this archive. December 6, 1963. Life magazine. 2 pages. For President Kennedy, an epilogue. 1 week after Dallas, Jackie Kennedy had telephoned Theodore H. White, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who had made his reputation covering JFK's 1960 campaign. The Life presses were already rolling for their memorial issue. They held, at a reported cost of $30,000 an hour, while White drove to the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. She spoke for hours. She came prepared with a specific memory she returned to repeatedly, JFK listening to the Broadway cast recording of Camelot on his Victrola at night. The musical had been written by his Harvard classmate Alan J. Lerner. She quoted its closing lyric. She said it was his obsession. The image of a lost kingdom. A brief shining moment. White's editor reportedly pushed back. The Camelot framing was too romantic, too soft for a news piece. Jackie refused to let it go. The essay ran. The word entered American history, where it has remained for 60 years. White's private working notes from that evening are now held at the JFK Presidential Library in Boston. They were donated with instructions that they not be made available until 1 year after Mrs. Kennedy's death. She died in 1994. The notes became accessible in 1995. Those notes make clear what White himself later wrote in a memoir. She was not weeping. She was not overcome. She was, in his account, in complete control of the conversation from the moment he arrived. She arrived with a clear objective for the essay. She had a precise image she intended to fix in the American mind. She executed it, in one sitting, 7 days after the assassination, with the precision of someone who had spent a decade managing a public image under pressure. She handed him the story she wanted told. He printed it. The gap between what White published and what his working notes recorded is the gap between the history she designed and the record she left behind. Both exist. At the same library. 100 feet apart. Spring 1994. Jackie Kennedy was dying of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was 64 years old. The diagnosis had come in January. She died in May. In the months between those dates, she burned letters. This is documented testimony. Jack Warnick, architect, longtime close friend, and according to Taraborelli, a man who had been romantically involved with Jackie in the years after the assassination, told Taraborelli directly she decided to take matters into her own hands while she was still able to do so. The letters she burned included correspondence from John Kennedy, from family, from friends, from people who had mattered to her over the course of a long and documented life. She had 33 letters in an archive in Dublin, at All Hallows College, written to a priest who had been dead for years. She may have forgotten about them. She may have thought they were beyond reach. She may have believed, reasonably, that a collection of letters sent to a private individual in Ireland in the 1950s and 60s would remain private forever. She could not know they would be found, auctioned, and reported on by the international press 20 years after her death. What she could reach, she destroyed. The version of herself she burned was the version that had made agreements, consulted attorneys, written the word hell to a priest in Dublin. The version that had navigated a marriage she had predicted, survived a stillbirth alone, been paid to stay, and burned her way out of the record before she died. What survived was the version she had not thought to burn. And that version, 33 letters, 130 pages, is the most honest thing she ever left behind. November 13, 1968. The last letter Jackie Kennedy ever wrote to Father Joseph Leonard. Exactly 1 month after her marriage to Aristotle Onassis on the Greek island of Scorpios. The world had responded to that marriage with something close to fury. "Jackie, how could you?" ran one headline. Time magazine put the wedding on its cover. The editorial writers felt personally betrayed, as though she had broken a solemn promise to the American public by refusing to remain a widow for the rest of her life. She was 39 years old. The American public had decided what her grief was supposed to look like, and this was not it. She wrote to Father Leonard, the archive that had held 14 years of her private truth. The priest was still alive. He died in 1970. She wrote to him once more. According to reporting by Bonhams, the auction house that separately sold a cache of her correspondence with British diplomat David Ormsby Gore, a man who had proposed to her after the assassination and been declined. This final letter explains in her own words what she had decided, and why. She wrote that Onassis was lonely and wants to protect me from being lonely. And he is wise and kind. Only I can decide if he can, and I decided. And then, I know it comes as a surprise to so many people. But they see things for me that I never wanted for myself. They see things for me that I never wanted for myself. Pause with that. In 1952, she wrote to the same priest that John Kennedy would propose for rather practical reasons. She went in knowing. She stayed in through what she had predicted and more, through the absences, through Arabella's birth alone, through the financial agreement, through a marriage she privately called a hell. She stood in the pink suit. She planned the funeral. She built Camelot in a single evening with a journalist and a pressed deadline. She sealed the tapes. She burned the evidence. And then, in 1968, she married again. For different reasons. Her own reasons. And she explained those reasons, not to the press, not to the Kennedy family, not to the American public that had decided it owned her grief, but to a priest in Dublin she had met twice, who would be dead in 2 years, and who had kept her private truth in a college archive for as long as he lived. They see things for me that I never wanted for myself. She knew exactly who she was, what she had chosen, and what it had cost. She simply spent a lifetime making sure the world received only the version she could control. The one she couldn't control is the one we have. And it is the truest thing she ever left behind.